Hi, my name's Vince Sheehan and today I'd like to talk about Mahler's Third Symphony, and I'd like to go through this huge work looking at the structure of each of the 6 movements. Most of this work was written in 1895 and then the first movement written in 1896. But some of the material used in the symphony goes back to the early 1890s. When Mahler met Sibelius in 1907 and said the symphony must embrace the world, he surely must have had his Third Symphony in his mind, written almost 10 years earlier. The Third Symphony has this universal element to it. You can catch glimpses of Mahler's intention here, not only in the music but in the titles he gave each of the movements to begin with, although that eventually he wasn't so keen on those titles. But the first movement, which is huge of course, he entitled Pan Awakes, Summer Comes Marching In, Bacchic Procession. The second movement, What the Flowers in the Meadow Tell Me. The third movement, What the Animals Tell Me. The fourth movement, What Humanity Tells Me. The fifth movement, What the Angels Tell Me. Sixth movement and the final movement, What Love Tells Me. And you can sense that there's some progression here from the stirrings of life. This is much commented on, by the way. From the first stirrings of life to through the created order to love itself. And like the Second Symphony, and I guess the Fourth Symphony as well, there's very much this transcendent preoccupation with this music, going beyond human experience into the life of the divine. Eventually Mahler decided the symphony should be in 2 parts. The first part, this huge opening movement, which can last as long as 40 minutes, and then the second part, the rest of the movements. Now, the first movement is actually fairly easy to follow despite its length. It's in a sonata form. We have an introduction with this unforgettable idea, which also forms one of the ideas in the second subject in this movement. So on. That opening melody's got a similarity which has always been remarked on with the finale of Brahms's First Symphony. Etc. Also in this first movement, which remember was completed last, we have this rocking idea which we hear in the fourth movement. It goes like this. And then eventually, via some pianissimo timpani beats, we come to the first subject, which sounds like a funeral march actually. And it reminds me a bit of Siegfried's funeral music from Wagner's Ring. We have this idea. We have these wails in the woodwind followed by this sharp pain in the solo trumpet. So there's this funereal tread to this music. And listen out for these discordant glissandi in the trombones, really striking, quite sickening sound and very characteristic of Mahler. Eventually we come to the second subject. Without a transition, we come to this idea, which reminds me of the magic fire music, again from Wagner's Ring. And then we have this idea the second subject group actually has lots of ideas in this movement, although the first time round we only hear some of them. We get this idea as well. We hear these scurrying semiquavers, and we hear just a brief snatch of a march on the percussion, da-lum, 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 etc. So the second group in this sonata form movement is extremely varied. The first time we hear this, though, in the exposition, it's actually shortened. It'll be much more expanded the next time round. We have a repeat of the first subject group, that funeral march, but Mahler being Mahler, it's never exactly the same the second time we hear it. And then we get to the second subject group again. This time, as I mentioned before, it will be vastly expanded. We have the magic fire music idea again. We hear that idea again. And underneath that we have this dotted idea. Etc. But also listen out in this the second subject group, the second time round, for these bird calls, which Mahler marks to be poco accelerando in the piccolo. That kind of flies off in the piccolo. That kind of flies off, feels free from the meter of the music, like that. Then we come to probably the main idea in the second subject group, which we don't hear the first time, which is based on that idea from the intro, the Brahms First Symphony idea, which goes like this. Definitely, I guess, the Bacchic procession, as from the original title of this movement. We have that violin solo idea back again, in a more schmaltzy vein. You get the impression with this music, and you know, this is a classic case of Mahler in this symphony, which encompasses this world of the highest art and the banality of everyday life coming together in one whole. And these marches perhaps represent something of more of the down-to-earth, everyday music of Mahler's day, you know, marching bands, perhaps of Bohemia, where he grew up. The second subject group comes to an almighty climax, and all of a sudden there's one of those Mahlerian collapses we often hear in his symphonies, where everything seems to fall apart like a scattered pack of cards. We hear the brass plays, and eventually the Codetta goes into reminiscences of the first subject, Funeral March. We hear this Codetta idea again in the sixth movement, the Adagio. We then go into the development, and the development really is this mighty part of this work where there's just clashes of marches, as if the material is trying to outdo each other. Particularly the second subject group, many of the ideas in that group are just kind of competing with each other. to see who will prevail. And added into this heady mix we get these additional fanfares as well. And you know, we get hints even of other Mahler's works. I mean, Mahler is one of those composers whose ideas are recycled a lot throughout his other symphonies, and there's definitely a hint of Mahler's Ninth, the Rondo, in this development as well. We have a collision of marches, and eventually right at the very end of the development we have this Marshall to 2 on the side drum, which takes us, you know, into a barely inaudible dynamic 4Ps, back into the recapitulation with the introduction. Usually for a recapitulation the intro is left out, but Mahler reinstates the introduction here with those horns blaring out that Brahms' first melody. We have the first subject again, the funeral march. The second subject group, again in a more slightly different guise from before. And we have that collapse with the Codetta. We have this incredibly short, for such a long work, Coda, where the timpani just bash out, boom, 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 boom. It's really thrilling. And this first movement of this amazing symphony, indeed the first part of the symphony, comes to a thunderous end. The second movement is all about flowers, according to the subtitle. It's based on 2 ideas essentially. And the first one is this, which I call section A. And then the second idea in 3, a quick 3. So on that kind of idea. We have a return to A, very romantically scored. It reminds me a bit of the slow movement from Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade here. We go back to B, again, you know, as Mahler always does, the repeats are always varied. And then A again, the first idea, A2, and then a coda, and then that's the movement really. Rather charming, gentle movement, much needed after the first movement of course. Then we have the scherzo, which is based on, well, we have 3 ideas really, which are alternated in this scherzo. The main one is this. Like a cuckoo sound there. Whatever. Lots of birds. And this A section, very kind of atmospheric, very beautiful. All about nature. And then we have this more boisterous idea then, which I call B. Something like that anyway. That dances along. We go back to A again with the bird music. We go back to B again, A again, and then we go into C. Now C is the trio of this movement, and famously it's played on a post horn off stage, which is like a bugle. It's based on a popular tune which other composers have used in the past, the Hotta Aragonesa. Again, this idea of Mahler using everything as material in his symphonies, no matter how trite, banal, profound, it all comes together in this melting pot. And quite beautifully we hear this melody. And then we eventually, via this abrupt trumpet fanfare, go back to A, B, A, B. The exact form is below in the description. And then right at the end we go back to the C again, that post-horn melody. And then we have a coda, which is incredibly surprising because we have that moment of judgment, of terror, of angst from the close of the second symphony. So again, Mahler recycling ideas from other works, and I suppose these Des Knaben Wunderhorn symphonies all share ideas to some degree anyway. The coda ends again in this amazingly thrilling way with the thumping timpani. The thumping timpani, boom, 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 boom. The thumping timpani ends 3 of these movements at least. The first, the third, and the adagio actually as well. The fourth movement is a setting of the Midnight Song from Nietzsche's Also sprach Zarathustra, and of course Nietzsche is very much in vogue at this time. You know, Strauss of course and other musicians, composers, writers all under his spell, and of course one of the early titles of this symphony was The Gay Science, which is another Nietzsche work. But this is a beautiful and otherworldly setting of this text. It's one of the first pieces of Mahler I heard, and I thought it was so strangely beautiful and otherworldly. In terms of its place in the programme, if you like, of this symphony, if we want to follow that, this is what humanity tells us. And we have, it's very much about the pains and the joys which we experience as humans. And we have a refrain in this text, very beautiful, contralto solo, and we have these ideas which we heard right at the beginning of the first movement, if you remember. And then we have the singer coming in. Very beautiful, very weird as well. It's almost as if this alto is calling us from, you know, the depths of time. Then we have basically a strophic form. We have A, which is, I guess, what we might describe as the first verse, and the harmony's so static. We move from A to D, which you could say is the tonic note of the whole symphony. And listen out for the harmonics on the strings. Gebracht, gebracht. And listen out also for this expressive oboe solo. We have orchestral interlude in the middle, and then we're back to the refrain again, and we move back to the second verse. We have some solo violin here, and the music ends as it began very mysteriously with a brief coda. The fifth movement, originally titled What the Angels Tell Me, is a setting from Des Knaben Wunderhorn, that folk collection of songs which Mahler drew on continually in these symphonies, these earlier symphonies. And the text really is about the joy of forgiveness and the joy of universal salvation and of everlasting life. So it's very much a Christian vision of heaven, of the future, through a very kind of childlike lens, I guess. And we have an intro with a children's choir, boys' choir, which do the bim bams of the bells. Bim bam, bim bom, bim bam, bim bom. And then over that we have this. And then the women's choir comes in 3 parts. Da 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 da. Very jolly music. We have a B section where the alto comes in, and it's slightly more troubled. Und sollt ich nicht wählen, du guter Gott. So on. So she kind of represents the, I think, the sinner being forgiven, or Saint Peter, as is referenced to in this. We have a lengthy transition for this short movement anyway on the bells, the bim bams. The bim bams sounds a bit more sinister in the minor mode. And then we come to the final section of this song, which I call C. It's loosely based on A, but it's different enough to be called something different. And it has more of a chorale feel to it, this music. And we have a coda based again on the bells. Bim bam, bim bam. And then we go into the final movement, the famous Adagio. Again, a massive movement. What love tells me. And we have this progression, don't we, in this work, from kind of nature to the plant life, the animal life, humanity, angels, and then we have this, what love tells me. And here Mahler seems to be going into the very depths of divine love itself. Now, much has been said about Mahler's faith, or lack of faith, his lack of Christian faith, I should say. Of course, he was born a Jew. I tend to believe that he was more religious than we give him credit for. I think this expression of love is very much in the Christian sense, agape, something which, remember, in the New Testament, God is referred to as love. And perhaps Mahler's got this in his mind as he wrote this. But we begin with this rather lovely melody. And this movement, I guess, is like a rondo, really. It's this idea keeps coming back with these episodes. There is an element of sonata form to it, as much development that goes on, but essentially it's a rondo. And we start like this. There's also this turn idea, a bit like the Adagio in the Ninth Symphony. Da, 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 da. You hear that throughout this movement, a bit like the Adagio in the Ninth Symphony actually. Then we come to a B section in the minor mode. I always think Shostakovich must have been influenced by this passage when he did the slow movement to the Fifth Symphony. We have this idea. That builds up to this almighty climax. There's a transition based on that turn idea from the A section. And so on. Eventually that takes us back to the D major of that opening hymn-like melody. the top, the woodwind have a counter melody. We have another transition, and then we're into the C section. And the C section in this rondo movement is very much a development of ideas we've heard already. We come to another emotional climax based on that melody, the hymn melody. And then we eventually go into 3 Fs with that idea again, that kind of collapse we had before at the end of the B section. And then we eventually work our way back to the A section again, the hymn melody. We have a coda where we have a brief snatch of the introductory idea from the symphony. We have those thumping timpanis, and we end with this magnificent D major chord, which could, I mean, Mahler writes lange on there, long, so that could just be, you know, it could last forever, that chord, in the depths of eternal divine love. Such a beautiful way to end the symphony. And that's Mahler's Third Symphony for you. And I'd like to thank Marius Nastasa for suggesting this symphony. If anyone else has any other pieces I'd like me to look at, please put them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and please click like and subscribe. Bye.